Hi, and welcome to the Marine Diaries first ever webinar. My name is Rebecca Daniel, and I'm the director of the Marine Diaries. Today, we are joined by an expert panel who will be speaking about plastic pollution. This topic has gained a lot of traction in recent years. It is also a topic that is of particular interest to the Marine Diaries team, having run a digital awareness campaign on marine plastic pollution last summer, which can be found on our website. The issue of plastic has also particularly resurfaced during the pandemic due to a rise in the use of PPE. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. This is going to be a fantastic discussion, and I hope everyone attending finds it really useful. Some of you may have been redirected to our YouTube channel, but rest assured we will be checking the chat box there for any of your questions. I will now hand over to my colleague, Ali Shaparsky, who will be the host of today's session. Over to you, Ali.
There we go, that's better. Hello, everyone. My name is Ali Shaparsky, and I will be your host and moderator throughout our plastic pollution webinar today. Without further ado, though, I would like to hand this over to our expert panelists for them to introduce themselves. We have Jo Royle from Common Seas with us today, Rebecca Burgess from City to Sea, Emily Stevenson from Beach Guardian, and Carmen Pavlov from the University of Victoria undergraduate program. Jo, would you like to introduce yourself and a little bit about your organization first?
Learning about the unmute. Hi everybody, good afternoon. I'm Jo Royle. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Common Seas, and we're a social enterprise dedicated to quickly and significantly reducing the amount of plastic produced and to stop it from polluting our rivers and seas. And I'm really looking forward to our discussion this afternoon. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Jo. Rebecca, would you like to introduce yourself next to everyone?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Rebecca Burgess. I'm CEO of City to Sea. We're a not-for-profit organisation running behaviour change campaigns directed around stopping plastic pollution in our oceans, but also similar to Jo, in our rivers and our waterways as well. All of our campaigns are across the UK and some now international as well. And we're a team of over 20 here based in the UK.
Thank you, Rebecca. Emily, would you like to go next?
Thanks very much, Ali, and thank you so much for having me join the webinar today. It's such an honour to be alongside such awesome women in conservation. So I'm the co-founder of Beach Guardian. My name is Emily Stevenson. Beach Guardian is a family-run community interest company that aims to engage, educate and empower against plastic pollution. We're based in Cornwall and we aim to operate through 5 different avenues. 1, education, 2, outreach, 3, research, 4, collaboration, and 5, working with businesses to help them reduce their reliance on plastics.
Thanks, Emily. Beach Guardian sounds great. And last off on our panel will be Carmen. If you'd like to say a few words about yourself, Carmen.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here today. It's morning here for me, so good morning and good afternoon to everyone. My name is Carmen, and I'm in my final year of study at the University of Victoria. I'm doing a double major in geography and environmental studies with a concentration in coastal geography. And I've worked with a diverse set of local environmental organizations here in Victoria, one of them being Surfrider, where I did a mini research project on compostable plastics used at UVic. Now Surfrider has started a new initiative called Beyond Bioplastics, which aims to better understand the issue of bioplastics through academic and community-based research. It'll also start to provide recommendations for regulation at all levels of government. And this initiative is kind of spearheaded by a researcher named Noah Snell. So I'm happy to pass along his information if you'd like to know more about that topic specifically or the initiative itself.
Thank you, Carmen. Wow, well, welcome everyone. I am also very excited to hear what you all have to say with the questions I've planned for you. It should be a great hour of learning about plastic pollution. So we will jump right into our questions. And I would like to remind our listeners out there, if you have any questions for our panelists or any questions about plastic pollution, please don't be afraid to ask a question in the Q&A box if you are following us on Zoom or on YouTube. Please comment and we will try to answer all your questions at the end as well. To start off with, I would like to briefly discuss the nurdle spill in South Africa right now. So last week, nurdles started to wash up on the beaches along the southern peninsula of South Africa. Authorities still don't know what container ship nurdles have fallen off of and flooded the beaches from, but an investigation is currently underway. And local organizations are asking the locals of the area to go to their beaches and help sift out the nurdles from the sand to eliminate them from the marine environment. Now, if you have no idea what I'm talking about and no idea what a nurdle is, I would like to pass it off to Emily if you wouldn't mind explaining to us what exactly is a nurdle.
Absolutely. Thanks very much, Ali. So we call them nurdles. Some people on our beach cleans call them noodles, but they are in fact the pre-production pellets that the majority of plastics start off as. So I have an example of some here. Don't worry, they are sterile. Now, as you can see, these are almost lentil-shaped pellets, and they're less than 5 millimeters in diameter, which makes them microplastics. And as I say, these are the pre-production pellets of plastics. These are essentially the building blocks in the plastic products that we know and love. For example, it takes 600 of these to make just one plastic bottle. And talking of spillages, the spillage of these into the environment is a real issue. In the UK alone, estimates put it as up to 53 billion of these nurdles polluting the environment every single year. So it's a real problem. But as you say, there are ways in which volunteers can tackle this by going down and sifting them out of the sand. It's really good fun. And you can even find some cool colors. I'm quite proud of my blue nurdle collection there. And speaking of container ship spillages, I just wanted to really quickly shout out to the community groups down in the southwest that are currently clearing up the container ship spillage that we are facing right now. And on the north coast of Devon, there are thousands of adult nappies currently washing up onto the beaches. So if anybody is based in the southwest, we're heading to join the cleanup efforts tomorrow morning down in North Devon. And you can find all the details online of that.
Thank you, Emily, for that great description of what nurdles are. I know when I first heard the word nurdle, I was like, what are people talking about? I was like, what has entered the waterways? So thank you for that. And the example of showing them too, that really puts the size into perspective for sure. Rebecca, I have a question for you now. Do you think that coronavirus has taken us back years in terms of reducing our plastic consumption? And will the fear of kind of reusables, especially with the virus lurking over us, be hard to overcome?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely taken us backwards, that's for sure. Coronavirus has slowed and negatively affected the progress that we all were making globally around plastics pollution. Masks are obviously the obvious use of single-use items that have come out of COVID, with billions now in circulation globally. But there has been many other U-turns, from coffee shops refusing reusable cups to retailers insisting on single-use bags for your online shopping. And that's why City to Sea back in June, when sort of lockdown was sort of gaining momentum, launched contactless coffee and subsequently our water refill guidance to give really simple, easy to understand guidance to retailers, to food to go sector, to allow them to continue to accept reusables in a safe way. Despite sort of the backtrack, I don't believe people are fearful of reusables, and I don't think businesses do either. If we look at the flurry of reusable initiatives that have recently come to light this must be testament to it. So from Burger King, McDonald's, Starbucks, all now trialing reusable containers or committing to trial in the many months to come. I recently spoke to Asda. For those that are in the UK, they might have seen Asda launch a new sustainability store up in Middleton. And my conversation very much was around only less than a handful of hundreds of customers over a couple of days period were concerned about COVID. So I feel that citizens aren't demonstrating sort of any fear or limited fear around the use of reusables. What we're unfortunately seeing is government guidance not sort of reflecting that, and also businesses, due to having to contend with a whole host of other issues at this current time, choosing the convenient option, and that is very much to go back to the single-use mentality whilst they get through the crisis. So good and bad news. Yes, we are definitely back a few steps. How long is anyone's guess, but I think the really positive and good news story is that there's even more commitment from citizens around the world to address this issue, and as long as we're directing that need and that request to our governments and our businesses around the world also, I think we can come out of it stronger.
Thank you, Rebecca. Yeah, so it's more of a businesses and us as individuals too that can make the changes, kind of stepping that back up. With that, Emily, with Beach Garden, you guys do a lot of beach cleans, as you previously mentioned. Have you faced any challenges with organizing beach cleans or completing beach cleans in the time of COVID? And are you noticing more PPE just getting washed up on beaches?
Yeah, so I mean, before COVID-19, our beach clean operation was as simple as it could get. We would put up a list of events on social media and say, we are going to be at this beach at this time with everything you need. All you have to do is turn up. Well, obviously, we can't do that anymore. We can't encourage huge gatherings of people, but it was really important for us to restart the beach cleans after lockdown, because aside from the fact that it's removing plastic from the environment, it's a huge social event too, and bringing people back together, reconnecting people to each other and the planet was so important after such an extensive period of isolation. So to do this, we needed to ensure we were going to keep all of our volunteers safe, but also other people on the beach safe too. So we've had to really limit numbers on our beach cleans, but we're doing this through booking on Eventbrite, just so we can monitor who is coming and how many people are coming. And it's worked really well. Everybody's been so receptive and adaptable. So it's been a pleasure to get back down on the beach, and hopefully we'll be able to start changing a few things and getting kind of back to normal. But for the moment, it's working really well, and we're so grateful for our volunteers for that. So I'd really encourage anybody to check out their local beach cleaning group and get back out there, because the planet needs us. And to your second point about the PPE washing in, it's a huge problem that we've been noticing, and I've been trying to document this as much as possible through lockdown on my daily walks. I'd say the biggest problem with the PPE, the real hotspots, are wherever there's high footfall, usually around shopping centres and public places. The beaches, we're not finding huge quantities actually washing in. You know, if you look in the Tideland, look for evidence of it actually being in the ocean, but we can only expect that this is going to increase, because once it's in the environment, once it's on the street, there's every opportunity for it to enter the ocean through the waterways. I have some of the masks with me. I will put gloves on for this show and tell, because obviously you can never be too safe. But here in this box, I have 250 face masks, and this is my collection from the last few months. I don't think my virtual background is going to like this very much, but there they are. Oh no! There we go. So you can see there are hundreds in there, and that's that really characteristic bright blue disposable face covering.
Thank you, Emily. Wow, that is quite the collection of face masks. So I have a follow-up from the audience too, but first I want to know, this might be kind of silly, but all right, I use it like I'm a person walking the street, I use my disposable face mask, I put it in the garbage can, or how do I properly dispose of it or dispose of this PPE that we are using every day now because of COVID, other than simply just putting it in the trash bin?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think this is what's really been missing through the whole of lockdown, is this misinformation. And I don't think there's anyone to blame in that. This is uncharted territory. Nobody knows the solution. Nobody knew how we could handle this. But as always with plastics, this PPE, the end of life wasn't really considered. And only now that it's a pollutant, we're starting to think, well, how should we dispose of it? I think the single best piece of advice, whether you're using disposables or reusables, is if you are finished with that item, make sure it's in the bin. If you want to go a step further, ensure you cut the straps that go around the ears, because these are a real hazard for entanglement of wildlife, both on land and in the sea. But I think what's potentially a step further is people walking down the street, they might think they're doing the right thing by putting a face covering in a bin on the side of the road, which is of course what we all think is right to do. But these face coverings, let me just get another one so I can show you, they are incredibly lightweight, and with the winter gales blowing in, for the most part, a lot of those masks will blow straight back out again, and especially the really flimsy lightweight plastic gloves too. So my advice would be to keep it with you and ensure you put it in the rubbish at home. That way we can really limit the escape into the environment. So if I just show you with this, it looks almost like a ship sail. So if that catches the wind, it's gone. And once it's in the environment, as I say, there's every opportunity for it to end up in the marine systems. So just keep it with you and put it in your bin at home.
Thank you, Emily. So we had a quick question from the audience here, and Julie reached out to us, and her son does a lot of beach cleanups in Cornwall, and he is not sure what he should do with the plastics that he could not take to the recycling compound. Do you have anything to add on that?
This is a great point for me to give a huge shout out to Lewis, her son. I hope it's the Julie and Lewis that I'm thinking of. Now, Lewis is a total inspiration, and I'm actually going to bring him up later as well. But he runs his own YouTube channel called Lewis versus Litter, and he explores all sorts of problems with plastic. And I think he's only 13, which I think is just so inspiring. But to answer this question, I mean, this was one of the biggest considerations when we first started beach cleaning, was that it was all well and good that we were taking the plastic off the beach, but if we just put it in the rubbish bin that's next to the beach, where does it then go? It's potentially just going straight back into an unsustainable waste stream. For my whole life, I've been told to make sure I throw my rubbish away, but where is away? We have no idea. We fantasize over this magical place that is away, but really we know that it's always going to be on the planet in some form. So we decided from the very beginning that we would keep everything that we found on the beach cleans and use it for something, whether that be an educational resource, or there are lots of different waste streams popping up. The Ocean Recovery Project is a great example. Now, for us as an organization, that's easy. For the individual beach cleaners, what can they do? They can't start hoarding all of this plastic like we're lucky enough to be able to do with the facilities that we have. So the best piece of advice is to recycle what you can, but obviously that's tricky when things are often contaminated when they come out of the ocean. But the best thing you can do other than that is just putting it in the general waste, because then we know that it's getting incinerated and limiting the escape into the environment. Obviously, it's not the best option. And as I mentioned, the Ocean Recovery Project are hopefully bringing out beach litter collection bins so that they can actually recycle marine litter. But until that solution is there, just make sure it's in the general waste and it's getting incinerated.
Perfect. Thank you, Emily. That's great. And now, so we're talked about plastics and kind of what we can do there. Now, Carmen, I want to ask you a question. So you worked with Surfrider Foundation Project at UVic, and you found that the so-called compostable plastics that were used at food services were not actually compostable. Why is this? And do you think a lot of compostable plastics or compostables aren't actually compostable and are just adding to our plastic problem?
Yeah, so essentially, UVic Food Services believed that by purchasing these compostable plastics, they were making a smarter environmental choice that allowed students to continue to purchase convenient food and drinks. They weren't aware that the products weren't actually composting because there was a disconnect between the producers of the compostable plastics and the compost facilities, with UVic Food Services essentially just being the middleman. So we basically don't want to criticize UVic or any other restaurants or users of compostable plastics, as these products are relatively new and they are marketed as a green solution to traditional plastics. Ultimately, we must keep in mind that the responsibility lies with the producers of these plastics. But as to why these products are not actually compostable, it is because they're still a plastic, which to our benefit and to our downfall means that they are durable and can only be broken down in specific ways. So although compostable plastics are made from more natural ingredients than traditional plastics, such as corn, they are still only constructed to be broken down into soil under very specific conditions and timeframes. And if you're looking at Vancouver Island or more widely across Canada even, these specific industrial conditions don't exist in facilities here. More importantly to kind of note is these conditions also don't exist in the ocean or in the forests or also in someone's backyard composting bin. And this is applicable to all types of compostable plastic. Additionally, compostable plastics can contaminate recycling and composting loads, which are as a result sent to the landfill where none of the products will degrade. So essentially, it boils down to the fact that compostable plastics are still a single-use item, requiring resources to produce and creating waste that just won't magically disappear.
Great, thank you, Carmen. So if I were to go to a coffee shop that said it had compostable plastic cups or compostable something, I would have to assume then that is not compostable. So is there a way, you kind of answered this already, but is there a way for me to tell if something is truly compostable or there isn't really a truly compostable source back to kind of easy takeout containers or coffee cups?
Well, it basically depends on the certification of the particular compostable plastic, and there should be a labeling on the product to indicate which certification the plastic is associated with. So here in Canada, the certification ASTM D6400 is the most common certification. And this label is the standard specification for solid material biodegradation by composting that is found on plastics designed to be composted in municipal or industrial facilities. So they are built or made to be composted, but only in specific industrial facilities. So even if this product is associated with that certification, it will not break down in most facilities. And that is because, as we kind of discussed earlier, they are not equipped with the right type of mechanisms to deal with these plastics. Breaking these products down requires very specific industrial composting conditions, including certain timeframes, bacteria type and abundance, temperatures, and so on, which do not exist in municipal facilities in Victoria, BC, or across Canada, or as I said before, natural environments worldwide. So when this is the case, compostable plastic that is labeled as compostable but not disposed of in that very particular way will act the same as a traditional plastic in landfills or natural environments. If there is no certification listed, there is no way to tell whether or not it is a certified compostable plastic. There is also a possibility that a product is a conventional plastic or a mix of fossil-based plastic or conventional plastic and bio-based plastic with false labeling. Because as things are being marketed as solutions, false labeling you can write compostable on it, but it might not even have that ASTM D6400 certification on it. So I would definitely encourage listeners to research the certifications of various types of bioplastics in your area to know more about it in your specific area. And this is also quite important because new certifications are constantly being developed.
Perfect. Thank you, Carmen. That was great. Joe, question for you now. Have you seen this misrepresentation of compostable plastics in your plastic drawdown campaign? that Common Seas does? And could you also tell us a little bit more about what is a plastic drawdown?
Yeah, for sure. Yes, we've definitely seen a misrepresentation of compostables. And I think that's down to everyone that we work with wanting to do the right thing and sometimes rushing to make the right, making the right decision with the information that they've got available to them. But we've seen this in many of the countries we've worked with, having an introduction of compostable alongside plastics that they're very difficult to recognise the differences between the two materials. So as we've just heard, the contaminating recycling streams, they require the same sort of littering and behaviour change. The end of life still needs managing, and it's really hard to enforce plastics versus compostable. So in some of the countries we worked in, for example, they've banned the importation of certain single-use items, but allowed the importation of compostable. So it's been very difficult to import in the ports. I think the reason why plastic drawdown is so powerful is that it helps government decision makers to get under the skin of the problem, and it enables governments to really understand the root cause and identify solutions while thinking of the system as a whole. So, for example, not to introduce a new material without co-designing the citizen engagement, the resource management and the enforcement strategy. So as far as compostables, I mean, if you want me to share a little bit more about plastic drawdown, it's a tool kind of and facilitation process that Common Seas runs as one of our kind of 4 main programmatic themes. And the tool's really been designed to support governments to make evidence-based mitigation strategies. We work with often you find that the government's departments responsible, the people responsible for tackling plastic pollution are very disparate across very many different government departments, from tourism to environment to health to foreign affairs to economy. So what we try and do with plastic drawdown is to bring all of the stakeholders together, and through a modelling process, we model the waste flows from consumption out to waste generation, and this kind of complex back of house modelling tool then provides a map of where, what are the key key items being polluted for that particular country, where in the value chain are they leaking, and then the model kind of helps to automate an overlayer which kind of analyses the effectiveness of a portfolio of policies that might suit that particular country's enabling conditions, so the geography, available finance, remoteness from a recycling sector or end of use life. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Jo. That was very interesting. I didn't realize there's so much disconnect between like the government agencies for plastic and kind of getting rid of plastics there. Thank you. So Carmen, I'm going to follow up with you again. So when I go and use a compostable item that's single use, am I just making myself feel better that I've used a compostable item when I forgot my cup rather than taking a reusable? Like, is that just a user-minded kind of advertising?
Yes, in a way, yes, because currently what we have found in facilities, at least in my area, is that the only type of compostable plastic that has been found to break down in the municipal facilities in some certain specific conditions are the thin compostable plastic bags. Things like hard plastics, such as utensils or like smoothie cups, they don't break down in these industrial composting facilities on Vancouver Island, despite their efforts to process them. So this is dependent on the facilities available in your community. So if they have, if they have the proper conditions, using a compostable plastic could end up being degraded, but studies across Canada have shown that these facilities, for the most part, don't exist in Canada. But in your area, as I mentioned, some facilities may have the technology and conditions required to properly compost these plastics. I would be very careful with this though, because even if the compost facility near you does process these plastics properly, the plastic first has to get to the facility, or in other words, the plastic must go through the correct waste stream to end up in the right facility. So I guess my advice to everyone would be to be careful about your use of compostable plastics, because they are, after all, still a form of single-use plastic that, if not properly disposed of in very particular conditions, will act as a traditional plastic within natural environments. It's important to do your own research within your local communities to determine how these new products are being dealt with, and to not fall into that greenwashing trap that we all have been kind of victim to at some point, that makes us feel better about consuming. So the ultimate responsibility, I would say, lies with the producers to ensure products are produced to be more sustainable, and potentially looking at working with communities to ensure that their facilities are able to match the product, because that's a huge disconnect right now. And then, of course, for us as a consumer to be educated or get educated on better consumer choices, which is excellent that all of you are joining us here today to just learn a little bit more about everything. So thank you.
Thank you, Carmen. We'll definitely have to watch when I do forget my reusable mug or anything, to not get washed in. I can skip the smoothie or takeout for that day for sure. Rebecca, with City to Sea, you have a lot of great campaigns about reducing plastics, everything from feminine hygiene products to straws to simply using less. Do you think there is one dominant plastic, both pre and post COVID, that people just don't know how to reduce or use less of, or then don't know how to recycle or what to do with afterwards?
Yeah, so yeah, thanks for registering our brilliant campaigns. Hopefully a lot of people on the webinar knows a little bit about City to Sea, but if you don't, check out the website. There's campaigns on plastic-free periods. Our Rethink Periods is an educational program. Refill, which is a campaign actually looking at single-use packaging. So it started off with water bottles and now tackles all different types of single-use packaging. So coffee cups, lunch boxes, and really championing zero waste shops around the globe. So download the app. I think it's worth sort of mentioning that all of our campaigns are centered on the waste hierarchy, which puts prevention and reuse at the top. And we work both with the public to give them sort of easy ways to engage in using less plastics and using reusables, but also we work really closely with business to get reusables more on the open market and more convenient so that people can adopt it. With regards to a plastic or one dominant plastic pre and post COVID, I would say a single-use plastic item that continues to give us a headache at City to Sea is crisp packets and confectionery wrappers. They're now named the #1 item littered on beaches, surpassing cigarette butts for the first time in the annual International Coastal Cleanup, which goes to show the growth of that market, and also that there isn't a convenient, simple switch, which, like with a lot of our other campaigns, there has been. So when we campaigned on cotton buds being transferred from plastics to paper stems or reusables, or in our period campaigns, it's taking it from plastic items to reusables. Water bottles, don't buy them, use your reusable bottle. There's not that convenient switch with crisp packets. Freshness is obviously really key, and so the only real options are either to stop buying them, to stop having your crisps and your chocolate right now, or to make your own. So there's some really amazing ways that people around the world are making their own, and kudos to them for doing so. Unfortunately, TerraCycle's already been mentioned. They obviously dispose of those items as long as they get them. So that's obviously a solution for the public at the moment if you can't go without your crisps and your chocolate. But I think there's a wider point around consumption and the public's appetite for really reducing or removing problematic plastic items from their shopping basket. So and we talk a lot about that in our campaigns also. Post-COVID, obviously disposable masks are out there and we've already talked about them. But on more positive news with the disposable masks, I would say many people who use disposable masks either do so through misguided hygiene concerns or simple convenience, and both of which can be addressed through successful campaigning and behaviour change initiatives. So I feel like that there's a clearer out with masks. Obviously, having a reusable one, washing that regularly, and not using disposables is what we champion here at City to Sea. But yeah, that's my answer to that one.
Thank you, Rebecca. That was great. Now, if I see a plastic item and I know I can recycle it because it says recyclable, such as a milk jug or something that I normally put in my blue box every day, does it still count as a single-use plastic?
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. So obviously, plastic production, about 50% of which is single use, used for a matter of minutes and then thrown away, are discarded and littering our environment. This not only takes precious resources from our finite planet, but our recycling systems here in the UK and globally aren't sufficient to actually make sure that those plastic items do get recycled. Only 9% of all plastic produced has ever been recycled. That means a massive 91% are still on planet Earth in its original form, whether that's in landfill or incineration, or obviously, tragically, in our natural environment. So again, back to consumption, unless we actually really challenge our consumption of items, plastic production will continue to grow, and it's closely connected with our climate emergency. So I think the stat is that plastic production will account for 15% of global greenhouse gas emissions by 2050 if consumption continues the trends that we're seeing, which is a huge proportion of the overall budget that we're working towards. So again, we'd just go back to consumption.
Perfect, thank you. So I guess moral there is everything is always single use, and even if you can properly dispose of it. So thank you, Rebecca. I'd just like to remind all our listeners to use the Q&A box rather than the chat for any questions that you would like to ask, and we'll try to get to them by the end of the webinar. Now, switching a little bit, we've talked a lot about big plastic items, what I guess I'd call macroplastics. Joe, question for you now. I've heard about things called microplastics and nanoplastics when it comes, especially in terms to plastic pollution. Could you elaborate a bit on what a micro and nanoplastic is?
Sure. So microplastics are smaller than 5 millimeters, and nanoplastics are even smaller, as you might have guessed. But there's some debate actually, about the upper size limits of nanoplastics. It's between 100 and 1,000 nanometers, so very, 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 very tiny. Both can come from bigger bits of plastic that break down into smaller ones, and some are manufactured for the specific purposes, like the exfoliating beads in body scrubs and additives to sandblasting materials and paints and what have you. Even though they're really, really tiny, they do add up to a huge volume, and there's a lot in our ocean. For example, in our plastic drawdown modelling for the UK, we were really surprised to learn that actually around 40% of all of the plastic escaping into our rivers and seas came from microplastics. And actually the kind of number one problem was the shedware off Tyodos, which is comprising around that 30% of the plastic pollution that the UK is emitting into the marine environment. And then other items such as plastic pellets and fibres from clothing. It was a recent study surprised me to say that a cup of tea, the tea bag was emitting around 11.6 billion microplastics and 3 billion nanoplastics. So I hope no one's sat there with a cup of tea making you question your choice. As you can imagine, all of these numbers are moving in the wrong direction. So in 2016, microplastics made up around 11% of all the plastic that we were finding in the ocean. But that leakage is set to at least double within the next 20 years.
Okay, thank you, Joe. I'm definitely going to question my tea bags now and stick to loose leaf, perhaps.
Maybe you're going to do a City to Sea doing a campaign on tea bags. I can imagine you'd be really effective at doing that.
Yeah, wow, that'd be great. I guess another question there, Joe, for you to follow up. Do you think that I guess you kind of answered it, but do micro and nanoplastics pose a bigger threat to our planet than larger plastic items that could be floating around?
Well, I think that all plastic pollution of all sizes is the fastest growing environmental threat to our planet and all of us. We found plastic everywhere, and I mean the problem with nano and micro and nanoplastic is that it's so tiny, it gets everywhere, and we found it everywhere, even in the core samples of Southern Ocean deep sea sediment, which is extremely concerning. There's been numerous studies around plastic particles in marine creatures. Many of these studies have involved having kind of fish or mussels in tanks and adding plastic particles and tracing where the particles going in the fish and the behaviour change. And we've noticed that, for example, one study showed that plastic is breaking through the biological barriers. So we found a polystyrene piece in a fish brain tissue. And how does it get there? You know, the particle must have been eaten by the fish, and either directly or via something lower in the food chain. And then the particles move from the fish gut into the blood and then across the blood-brain barrier. We've also known that plastics getting in so there's evidence that plastics getting in and staying inside organisms, but we're noticing that the plastics also having an effect on the organism's metabolism and even the behaviour. And I think there was a study that came out today that showed that feeding microplastics to a group of fish made them actually take more risks. So they were swimming into more riskier areas and where they might get eaten by predators. And this was a study was kind of suggesting that the fish were still hungry, even though because they'd filled up on microplastics and not they were missing the nutrition, which you can imagine if we just ate microplastics, we wouldn't get the nutrition. But I think this is very interesting for Common Seas, because we're very focused on understanding the physical particle and of how the physical particles of plastic are impacting our health. And we currently have studies in laboratories looking at the impact of the plastic particle on the human health, and a lot of our kind of research is based on what we've learned from fish and marine creatures.
Okay, thank you, Joe. Yeah, that's a very interesting study. I'll have to read it at some point on the fish there. Wow, definitely impacting our marine food webs quite a bit. So Emily, I know you're currently completing your master's, and you're doing your master's on how bacteria may be spread through these microplastics. Do you have any findings that you're allowed to share with us to kind of elaborate on that?
Well, luckily or unluckily for me, I'm currently in the write-up stage of my project. So wish me luck. This is proving a really lovely break from writing. So I can't say with confidence any of my findings at the moment, but watch this space and do keep an eye out on the Beach Guardian Facebook page, because I'm sure I will be sharing some very interesting findings too. But what I can do is do a whistle-stop tour of what my research is looking into and why it's important. So as you correctly said, my research looks into the role of microplastics in the dissemination of bacteria. Specifically, I'm looking at antibiotic resistant pathogens. And it's really interesting, and I'm mostly looking into the role of biofilms. And the best way to describe a biofilm on a microplastic is when you think of, I mean, we've all seen, if you go into a harbour and you look at the boats in the water, the piece of the boat that's below the water level is usually coated in algae. And this is a process called biofouling. Well, microplastics in the environment have this very same consequence, where they are coated in a layer of microorganisms, and this is the biofilm, and it's been termed or referred to the plastisphere, and this is the kind of interface between the plastic and the surrounding environment. And in that plastisphere community is a whole consortium of different organisms, from bacteria, fungi to algae. And there's research looking into whether the microplastics are actually enriching for potential human pathogens, and also enriching for pathogens that are resistant to the treatment of antibiotics. So this is what I'm looking into. So my research is looking at whether different microplastics from different sources are differently colonized by potential human pathogens that are resistant to antibiotics. And we know that wastewater treatment plants are a point source for microplastics, antibiotics, and fecal indicator organisms like E. coli. So my research kind of looks at how all of these three things work together, and the consequence on that of ecosystem and human welfare. So please do watch this space, because hopefully I've got some really interesting findings to share with you soon.
I am both looking forward to and nervous for the findings that you're gonna receive, Emily. That's great.
Thank you.
Now, I know I've read a few things where, I guess you kind of mentioned that actually latch on to microplastics and ride around. Could things like invasive species and like larvae also latch on to microplastics and macroplastics and then be spread farther than their normal range would be?
Yeah, so this is kind of the what next of my research, because as we know, microplastics and macroplastics have a much longer half-life than any other debris in the ocean, and they can persist and travel much further than natural debris. So, I mean, for my undergraduate research, I looked at the invertebrate colonization of macroplastics and whether microplastics were introducing invasive species. So I did a 6-month study looking at the plastic that was washing up onto the beaches here in North Cornwall. And of all of the items that I surveyed, I found 89 different species that were attached to these macroplastic pieces. Now, of those 89 different species, 4 of them were invasive. So we're already seeing the consequence of plastic in that it can disseminate species much further than their native range, becoming invasive species. And there's a theory behind this where we've all heard of climate change. Obviously, we know the sea surface temperatures are rising, and people kind of theorize that the introduction of invasive species is only going to increase because these animals, these creatures might be seeing plastic as this, floating material as a way of avoiding these increasing temperatures and migrating polewards to cooler temperatures that are in their thermal tolerance limits. So of the 4 invasive species that I found on the plastics washing into our coastline here, one of them is renowned worldwide as an invasive species, and this is the seaweed Sargassum muticum. Now, the problem with Sargassum muticum is that it has a much faster growth rate and reproductive rate than all our native species. And all you have to do is take one look at the rock pools down here, the rocky shore. It's totally overrun by this seaweed, and it produces these monospecific, these single species mat of seaweed on the surface of the rock pool, so it blocks out all the light levels for the other species living in there. And this is a really good representation of the impacts that invasive species can have to native species. Invasive species are the second biggest threat to biodiversity loss. it's happening now, and unfortunately it's only going to increase.
Thank you, Emily. So it's not just the buildup of these plastics in the water, it's also they're making organisms travel to where they shouldn't be too. So it's definitely an issue we're going to face more of. Speaking of kind of a buildup of toxins, Joe, I have a question for you now. So there's been a lot of research and news coverage, especially where I am, about the plastics and the toxicity and the buildup of these plastic particles in larger marine predators. So you mentioned the tea bag, and I know as humans, we're kind of top of the food chain, both the terrestrial and the marine environments. Does plastic accumulate in us? And if so, do you think people realize how much plastic they are putting into their bodies?
Well, actually, I'm most concerned about whether plastic particles, particularly the dust particles, are accumulating in us and what impacts that might have. In truth, we don't know how much plastic is accumulating in our body or the health implications. But we do know what I just said about the fish, so we know that plastic particles are travelling from the gut into the brain barrier of the fish. We know that that is impacting the behaviour of that species. We've got evidence that there's studies around kind of plastic hip joints and knee joints shedding, and that those plastic particles are lodging in tissues. And obviously we know that we've got plastic in our food and in our tea bags and tea that we're drinking and water that we're drinking, air that we breathe through the tire dust and many other paint on the walls and everything. So we know that I think we pretty much around our screen, we're pretty confident that there's plastic inside us. At Common Seas, we're, and I'm sure many around here, we really feel that engaging, kind of alerting people around the health implications of plastic will accelerate our drive towards a plastic circular economy and better waste management globally. So at the moment, Common Seas has a lab, and for many months, unfortunately, science doesn't run on the same time frame as advocacy, I've learned, but we've been developing a methodology to identify and quantify the polymers in our blood, and we're just moving on now to look at the accumulation of polymers in our tissues. So looking at some intestine samples and some brain samples, and from there we can start. First of all, we need to identify where they are, how they're accumulating, and then from the accumulation we can link to the effects. And there is an understanding that these particles are accumulating because they're as we know, they're persistent in the marine environment, and they're persistent in our bodies, and obviously our army of blood cells come and kind of fight against them and are not going to win. So it can cause an inflammation, and inflammation is the root of a lot of chronic conditions that we all have, or we know someone that has, such as like an asthma or Crohn's disease and a rheumatoid arthritis. So we're really committed to that. We're also looking at the role, and in fact Emily was touching on it, so I'd love to read your dissertation, the role of mismanaged waste as a vector for pathogens. So we have an office in East Java, and a team working along projects working along the Brantas River, which is one of those top 10 most polluted rivers in the world. And in that river, we have over 1 million single-use nappies entering every single day. And it's just a massive amount to get your head around. And there we've got women empowerment groups working to produce a reusable diaper and reusable diaper enterprises, which is fantastic. But they're very concerned about this mismanaged waste causing disease for their children. So we're looking at the kind of relationship between mismanaged waste and increased like the common diseases which affect the children and obviously the economy.
Okay, thank you, Jo. That was a great answer. Yeah, there's a lot of issues for sure about us consuming plastics, and a lot that hasn't, I guess, been studied or realized yet.
Yeah, and I think a lot that, I mean, we're such a small organisation, and I think that it's a really underfunded area. There's a lot of advocacy, finance going into advocacy, but not enough going into accelerate the research. We're kind of very clear on what the research questions are, and I think, you know, until we've got really strong research, we won't be able to stand up against, you know, the biggest polluters and really reduce the amount of plastic being produced. I'll stop talking about it now. It's my pet topic, so I'll put myself on mute. Okay.
No, thank you, Joe. I'm glad we have Emily, and I'm sure a bunch of other people out there hopefully studying plastics and are able to kind of empower organizations like you to get the authorities to kind of break down on this. So thank you. Last question for my panelists. I'll direct it to Rebecca, and then we'll maybe quickly answer one or two questions from the audience before we conclude here. All your answers have been so great. We're running out of time. So Rebecca, by moving away from single-use plastics, which hopefully we are, especially for our health, we are buying lots of reusables. So we are buying things like Tupperwares to store leftovers and for takeout, and we were buying coffee mugs and tote bags. Do you see any issues with the constant purchase of these reusable items over single use?
Absolutely. Reusables are for life, and you don't need a whole stack of them. I think there is a concern that people are purchasing them as a fashion accessory time and time again, and not really understanding that, like single use, they take precious resources from our planet and need to be used a number of times before they can make a positive contribution and environmental footprint. So it's worth noting that a lot of pro single-use LCAs, life cycle analyses, do not account for the environmental degradation that comes from single-use items. So there are massive environmental benefits for using reusables as long as they are used. In our refill campaign, we very much promote using any type of reusable. It doesn't need to be the most beautiful reusable bottle that you can find on the market or the most expensive. It just needs to be something that you can remember to take with you and obviously use time and time again. We're also championing all reusable manufacturers to offer repair and return services so that every item continues to get used for many, many years to come. I know that this is something that our partners, Chili's, who we work with on reusable items where they give us donations, which is very much appreciated, they are actively exploring this area of repair and reuse to continue to enhance their own sustainability and be a more responsible business. So it's starting to get traction, but I just champion all listeners to please not go and buy another reusable if you've already got one in the house.
Good tip, Rebecca. Thank you for that. I know I've definitely been a consumer on that for sure when I see another cute coffee mug that I have to have. So definitely to hold everyone responsible for that as well, especially coming up into Christmas season and everything as well. So 2 questions that I'm just going to choose from the audience right now. Thank you everyone for answering all my questions that I accumulated on plastics. First question here. I'm not sure if maybe Emily or Joe, if one of you want to take this, it relates probably most to you guys. Are there any processes that can remove micro and nanoplastics from our waterways? I'll let Emily or Joe, one of you, if you want to jump on it, or if you don't have an exact answer, that's okay as well.
Well, maybe we can both offer one. So one way is microplastic filters on washing machines, which I think has been a really long time coming, because we know that our clothes, you know, many of our clothes, although not mine obviously, no plastic clothes, but many of our clothes have plastic content in them, and every time we wash them they leach out an incredible amount of microplastics into our waterways. And I've kind of been campaigning on plastics for over 10 years, and I've always found it. I've always thought, well, surely this year someone's going to produce a filter, and every washing machine that we get will have a filter in it. But it's still coming, and it's been amazing to see that France has recently passed legislation on their washing machines to have all of them on the market. So with the filters. So I think that's an easy one. We know it's an easy technological fix. So there's many though. Emily, do you want to?
I think that's a really great one, and probably, as you say, the most simple technological fix that we can all do. I think with microplastics specifically, it's so hard because obviously they are so small. There's lots of great organizations combating the macroplastics like the ocean cleanup, but the microplastics are tricky. I think that this is exciting though, because it leads for a lot of room for sustainable innovation. I was in a webinar the other day and somebody was talking about nature-based solutions to microplastics. Somebody thinks that maybe we could set up filter feeding farms of mussels to suck out all of the microplastics from the ocean. I wouldn't want to write the ethics form for that, but I do think that there's definitely an exciting movement for innovation to combat all kinds of plastic. Like we were talking about the crisp packet issue. Rebecca, I think, raised the issue of it being, such a big issue of crisp packets polluting the environment. There's a great organization down here in the Southwest called Plastic Oceanic, and they can turn crisp packets into really beautiful jewelry. I have an example here, and you can see in there, that's all shredded up crisp packets in an eco resin. So as I say, there is so much room for really cool, creative innovations to tackle these global systemic issues.
Great answers, you guys. Thank you for that. The last question here that I'm going to choose, this is from Gemma Waring, and she's wondering, how can we encourage the public to use reusable or how can we encourage the public to use reusable face masks? I'm not sure, Rebecca, you want to try to tackle this one, or?
Yeah, of course. I think it's about norming reusable masks. So a lot of our behaviours as individuals are based on other people's behaviours. So if we see in the public more and more people wearing reusable masks, we're more likely to. It would be great to see a time where you feel sort of a little bit guilty for using your disposable mask when walking down the street, and that sort of that social kudos is really key to any of our successful behaviour change campaigns, making them accessible, making them convenient. So instead of supermarkets and retailers stocking tons and tons of single use, seeing reusables stocked, I think is key. And obviously having a number in, so one in your handbag, one in your coat pocket, one at work, so that you don't forget them and find yourself in dire need and therefore have to turn to using a disposable. We created a really nice, I say nice video, a horrible video around mask pollution also. So I'd encourage everyone to have a look at that and obviously share it across your channels too.
Thank you. Well, we're running a little bit over, so I'm going to wrap this up by first of all saying, I know we didn't get to everyone's questions. We will accumulate the questions from the audience asked, and we'll send an email around to our wonderful panelists and see if they wish to answer any of those. And we will post those answers as well as all the links we've collected on the Marine Diaries website, if you'd like to follow up there. And I guess to conclude this briefly, would each panelist like to go and just say one quick, like 30-second tip about what you do to reduce plastics or what you want people to do to reduce plastics? Maybe we'll start with Carmen.
Hi. Yeah, I really am a big believer or doer, I guess, of bringing my own reusable bags to shopping centers, and specifically also not using the plastic produce bags. We have a lot of those here in Canada, and a lot of people still use them. So not using those plastic produce bags is a big one for me.
Thanks, Carmen. Emily, what would you like to say?
Ordinarily, my answer to, oh no, my video. It says my video's gone. It's back. There we go. Whew.
Oh no, we can still hear you.
Good old technology.
There we go.
Ordinarily, my answer would be to get yourself a reusable drinks bottle. That's always been what I'd say from the very beginning. But my answer changed after I spoke to Lewis, who I briefly mentioned earlier. And I'm going to steal his piece of advice because I think it's so special, in that the one thing that we can all do, not only focusing on plastic, but all environmental issues, is just talk about the planet. It is the most human, the most simple, the most accessible thing that we do every single day. Just by talking about the planet, connecting with each other, connecting with nature is the best way that we can protect it. What we're doing today is a step in the right direction. Tomorrow, talk about the planet. The next day, tell somebody what you love about nature, and step by step, it will get more and more people involved and more people helping the cause.
Thank you, Emily. Rebecca, what would your plastic tip be?
Yeah, it's similar to Emily's, if I'm honest, and that is everyone taking to social media and calling out your local coffee shop if they're not accepting your reusable, or your retailer who's not allowing you to use your reusable bag, and the brands that aren't championing, are still championing single use over reuse. I mean, people power can really make a difference. A long-time friend and supporter of City to Sea recently took to Twitter to call out a national coffee chain here in the UK who refused her reusable coffee cup, and she shared our contactless coffee guidance. And since then, they've changed their policy and they're now re-accepting reusables. So it definitely shows that people do have the power. People will be listened to, because businesses do not want to see a drop in custom, especially now that COVID has happened.
Thank you, Rebecca. And Joe, what would you like to say to add, or what is your tip on how we can all do better?
Something that we enjoy doing at Common Seas is keeping our plastic waste for 7 days now and again. And each time we do it, we revisit what waste we've still got in our households, and we choose one more item to focus on, and we can share the journey to reduce that item. And we've had a lot of fun and learned a lot through doing that together. And I think one kind of really wonderful thing about reducing your own personal plastic footprint is it really helps you to connect your environment, your local community, your local environment, and you can get out and think, right, how, for example, am I going to get my coffee without having the laminated metal plastic container, and you have to go to the roastery, and you have to, so it brings a sense of community and living locally, and really, which is, a key point of protecting our nature, and which is, I think, a driver for certainly Common Seas' focus on plastics. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Well, I am blown away by how impressive all you ladies are in your conservation efforts for plastic and the movements you're doing and the knowledge you have. Thank you so much for participating in this plastic pollution webinar hosted by the Marine Diaries. Thank you so much, and continue with your great campaigns. To our audience, please remember that this is a series of webinars we are hosting on different conservation issues that affect our marine environment. Also, don't forget to follow us on our socials, as well as follow Common Seas, City to Sea, Beach Guardian, and Carmen Pavlov to get more information on about their campaigns and what you can do to help. A recording of this webinar, if you wish to share it and talk about plastics, as we all know is great and an effective way to help us all reduce. Please go to our YouTube channel for the recording to share around to old friends, family, and any member you can find. And everyone, thank you and have a great day, and visit our website for the questions that we did not get to. So once again, thank you to all our panelists for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ali, and for all the amazing empowering work you do on Marine Diaries. It's a fantastic channel.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone for coming on. Bye.